Simple little stacks of paper that are bound together, and suddenly they become the symbols of people's imagination, an opportunity to explore the world. And they also become, for many artists, the source of great anxiety and stress. Why the hell is it that such a simple object has so much power? My name is Eddie Ortega, and since the year 2020, I've made a sincere practice of sketching almost every single day. If you either like drawing, would like to draw, or feel like sketchbooking is something that you admire, but it feels out of reach to you, this video is totally for you. And if you've actually suffered from the anxiety and the shyness of feeling like your sketchbook isn't good enough, I was you not that long ago. So stick with me, I'm gonna share with you the 4 unexpected lessons I learned from finishing 10 sketchbooks. All right, so let's start at the very beginning, way before 2020, when I was a child. My earliest memories of drawing were times where I was just trying to replicate my favorite cartoons, my favorite movies. You know, for me, as a kid, this was Pokemon, this was Zelda, this was all the video games that I was playing as a young 90s kid that I thought were just cool concepts. And honestly, I can remember that time of my life where drawing was this kind of question mark. I didn't really know why I was doing it, but I also knew that I couldn't stop myself. Like there was something more to this experience of trying to draw that felt like something sort of like a conversation. What do I mean by that? When you give somebody a pencil to write something, most of us have been taught how to write and we've been given a framework. But suddenly with drawing, there's this weird thing that happens where the moment a person faces a blank page, they're just frozen. And the idea of immediately transcribing some movement from their body into a page is like this experience that is, for whatever reason, for many people, very anxiety inducing. Like, what is this process, right? It wasn't until many years later, more recently, that I actually understood that drawing is actually like a physical manifestation of an inner thought process. So the first thing I want to share with people is that sketching is not really about technical skill or progression, but really it's just an exploration of what are you curious about? What are you excited about? If you're like me, you might be fascinated by people's faces, or you might be excited about a particular cartoon and have aspirations of making a comic someday. Or hell, maybe you just like identifying the plants you see when you go out on a hike, and you just like to capture the little moments of your everyday life. So if you struggle with your drawings or you aren't really sure what the point of sketching is, I just want you to remember that anything goes. Everything is valid. Whatever you're excited about, whatever you're curious about, whether it's things you want to understand better in the world, or maybe some idea that you have in your head that you can't quite put words to, those are all valid subjects as a starting point for just sketching and exploring them with little motions of hand on pad. And so this brings me into the next lesson that I think is really obvious, sounds really obvious, but is actually really hard to remember once you start to follow that thread of intuition and curiosity. Too many of us, way too many of us start with art from a sense of too much expectation and high pressure about the thing that we're supposed to do. It's a performance. It's a qualifier of our self-worth. It's this thing that is just academic. You know, art has to be a workout and you have to always be out of your comfort zone and always pushing yourself to go harder and harder and harder. I think there's fantastic value in discipline and in learning how to build discipline. But the opposite of no pain, no gain, in my opinion, is no joy, no progress. If you can't have joy in the process, it's going to be nearly impossible to stick with anything long enough to actually see any progress whatsoever. So for example, these little drawings that I'm showing you here, they're not necessarily the most technical or the most academic drawings. And yet, they're drawings that I'm actually really proud of. They're fun, they're interesting. Every time I show them to people, people are like, oh, this is such a cool little world that you've built. But in reality, they're the result of just having a lot of fun with my drawings. What you see here, which now looks inked and has watercolors and it feels very complete, actually started way back in my first sketchbook from the pandemic, where I was just doodling little shapes and thinking about friends and family that I missed. It was kind of like I was putting back together a bunch of memories through just having fun on the paper. And you could see how these evolved from that process of joy and kind of connecting with my present experience. And I just kept going with them. And eventually they started to take shape. Then I started to imagine little people that lived in these houses and entire towns. And eventually a whole storyline, a whole little world that I would love to build. But it really just comes from that process of joy. And the progress, the process that comes from it is just a sort of a side effect, a continuation of that fun exploration. From this process, I've also developed a bunch of other worlds, comic book ideas, characters, people that live in my head that are always saying different things. I try to kind of collect different experiences. And it all comes from that initial sort of joy of, I heard a cool phrase and I'm like, ooh, I want to remember that. Or I saw a cool sight and I was like, ooh, I want to remember that moment. So the most important thing, if you got nothing else out of this video, is no joy, no progress. Before you're beating yourself up about technique and working out and flexing super hard on everybody and all of that, figure out what you're excited about and follow that thread. It's the most joyous, most fun thing you can do. I promise. All right. If you are interested in this kind of thing, the creative process, the thinking behind how something gets made, my channel is full of sketchbook tours, tutorials, where I discuss in much more detail everything I'm learning while I'm developing my craft. I just feel like the internet is full of a lot of the really cool stuff, a lot of the really amazing looking stuff that is impressive, but it's actually really rare to see some of the more sort of the good, the bad, and the ugly. So that's what I try to do here. And if you're into that kind of thing, check out the playlists that I'm going to leave in the description of this video. Okay, let's fast forward a little bit here. So first few years, I started to rediscover this sensation, this realization that sketching is a kind of inner conversation and that I have to be able to have fun with it, right? Once I connected both of those things together, the machine kind of runs on itself. The idea of finishing a sketchbook stops being a 100-yard sprint that you're trying to get to. It just becomes a natural process of my daily life. Now, let's say you get to the point where you do want to develop some technique. Again, in any creative art form, it could be anything. It could be filmmaking. It could be making videos, knitting sweaters. It could be, you name it, writing novels. What I've learned about technique is that a little bit, just a little bit of foundation goes a very, very long way. But how do we build techniques, foundations, in a way that is actually sustainable? Well, here's the trap. Here's the problem that people get stuck with. Everybody thinks, I learned the foundations first. Here they are. I made them. I have spent all these years learning foundations. And then I can do the fun project. I can try the cool thing. I could explore my imagination, right? But here's the problem. How will you know that you actually have studied enough foundation? How will you know that you made it? The truth is that fundamentals are infinite. And just from drawing from observation, you could spend your entire life honing your fundamentals and you'll never reach the end. It's infinite. And so what I've learned is you don't need to go to school, do all the academic stuff, take classes, spend years in the hyperbolic Dragon Ball time chamber where you become all strong before you can actually take on your projects. The better way to do it is just to identify the little bit of fundamentals that would really make a difference for you. So again, should I study perspective? Should I study figure drawing? Should I learn how to make my own paper? Should I learn how to make my own paint, my own brushes? Instead of letting all of those questions stop you from even starting, what I would rather do is go back to that initial inner conversation and ask yourself, what do I really need to learn here that would help me with my ambition, whatever that is? For example, for the longest time, I was really obsessed with mark making. So all I would do is just experiment with different kinds of ways of making marks. Markers, brushes, ink brushes, paints. Then in another season of these 5 years that I've been drawing, I was like, okay, it's time. I really have to figure out how to put bodies in space. So here's a season where I spent, just days upon days where all my sketchbook pages are just like me looking at pictures of the clavicle, looking at pictures of the neck and the body, and trying to take in materials that are about exploring and developing that one technique. So it's okay for it to be seasonal. Seasons of studies, seasons of trying projects, and going back and forth creates a really good synergy that helps you find a sense of direction. And so naturally that thing that started as a sketching practice starts to become a subject of study, but it has purpose, right? It has connection. Okay, and the final piece of advice, the one you probably don't want to hear if you clicked on this video. I've found, as somebody who was very afraid to share my drawings, very afraid to expose myself, sharing your art with other people changes everything, man. If art is a conversation with the world, the thing that we create is an opportunity to share, to have a conversation with other people. You don't have to show it to the world. You don't have to put it on Instagram. Not everything that you make has to be for anybody else. Hell, you could show it to your dog for all I care. But for me, sharing my art didn't just make me better. It didn't just make me a better artist, but it also strengthened my relationships. Because there were so many times that I would share my sketchbook with someone where I would be like, hey, check this out. And then, or they would be like, oh, can I look at it? And I'd be like, oh, I don't know. Maybe. And eventually I just started to learn that the people who are going to connect with something in here are connecting with you ultimately. So I'd have friends say, oh, I really like this thing, or I really like this drawing, or I really like the way you did this. And sometimes it actually is a portal for me to get to know my friends better. Conversations that would have never happened otherwise were sparked from something that I drew. And so if you fear sharing whatever your creative practice is, your writing, your photographs, your films, whatever it is, instead of looking at it from the lens of self-worth, quality, a comparison against some other thing that's out there in the world, I really would love for all of us to see art as just an opportunity to share and strengthen our connections with each other. A lot of your self-perceptions are exactly that. They're self-perceptions. You haven't actually given anybody else the opportunity to tell you how they see it. So when you share your work with someone, when you hand somebody your sketchbook, just, if you have that instinct to be like, oh, this is all crap, shh, hold your tongue. Just wait for a second and let them have a silent conversation with the image that you made and see what they say. And so that's why sharing art is worth it. And I think that gets us back to the root of what creativity and human creativity is actually really about. This approach to sketchbooking changed everything. I no longer look at these little pieces of bound paper as empty vessels with which I have to fill my entire self-worth and creativity. On the contrary, I just see them as an opportunity to explore and to ask more questions of life. What am I curious about today? What would I like to learn? Does that make sense? It's crazy how such a simple item can have so many complicated symbols for different people. So if you enjoyed this video and would like to see more art adventures, I think you'll love this next one about how to finish more sketches while still having tons of fun. I'll see you on the next one.